Hello and welcome to another episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host Mike Roderick, and with me today is Mr. Sean Oriano. How are you doing, Sean?
I am doing pretty good. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. We got another episode of our Kali Linux series coming your way, and in this one we're going to be talking about what happens after you gain access to a system. This is our exploitation phase in our progression. We've talked about gaining access to the system by doing some offline password cracking or doing some online password cracking. Now that we've got a username and password that we can use to get onto that system, our next step then, Sean, is to possibly do some privilege escalation depending on what kind of account we got in the first place, right?
Yeah, that would definitely be a good next step, is to see if you could acquire the credentials of an account that could boost your access just that much more. And there are ways to definitely do that and to do it pretty well. One of the things you can use to do that is a little utility known as DSniff, and this is one that we're going to see again when we talk about sniffing. It's in a later section. But what DSniff can do for you is if you do DSniff, you can just do DSniff, tell it to go listen on an interface and do tell it, in this case, ETH0, like we've been doing all along, same interface. So now it's listening here. Well, the thing that's really neat about this is that, okay, it's not doing anything, right now, but what will happen is that it's not, why it's actually listening, you're not seeing anything appear. What's going to happen is that if I were to go and start, doing an FTP session, or it picked up traffic relating to an FTP session, it would display just the credentials. That's all it would show. It's to tell you, hey, here's the server, here's the credentials that you used to log in, and that's it. So it is definitely a sniffer and fits in that category pretty squarely. But what we're seeing here is that because it only picks up those credentials and nothing else, it's going to help you do a potential privilege escalation, because yeah, FTP is one thing, but there's plenty of other protocols that it can also do that with as well that could help you out. So that's a pretty neat thing. DSniff can do it with SMTP and stuff like that too. So it's pretty varied and broad with the protocols that it supports.
So this is, rather than just running a generic sniffer that's capturing all traffic, and then I've got to go in and filter it down and look for authentication packets or look for what I'm needing, I can run DSniff and ignore all that other stuff. And it's just going to show me those authentication packets that are going by for different protocols.
Yeah, we'll pluck those ones out and just display the information that pertains to those things it's designed to look for. Anything else just gets dropped. It's not even going to pay attention to it. So that what you end up with is a nice, piece of information, and nothing else. It's just eliminated all that. You don't have to go searching for it or any of that. It's right there.
And I'm hoping most of you have run a packet capture utility at some point in your careers, and you know that on a network with more than one computer, even with just one computer, you fire up Wireshark, you're getting all kinds of traffic, right? And then you've got to go back in and run your filters to get down to what you need. So having something like this that focuses on just those authentication or just those passwords for the different protocols, that's fantastic. That saves me a lot of time. I don't have to dig through 200,000 packets to find the 10 that I'm looking for that dealt with some authentication on some of those conversations. So that's great, Sean.
Yeah, it really narrows stuff down for you. And just to give you an idea here, I don't need to show you this, but here's an idea of the protocols that DSniff will actively search out credentials for. It's got FTP, Telnet, SMTP, HTTP if you're passing it over that, POP. It's got NNTP, IMAP, SNMP. There you go. LMAP. It's got a lot of the routing protocols in here. MS-CHAP is in there. NFS is in there. It's actually got Napster. Imagine that. It's got IRC, AIM, ICQ. It's got some Citrix stuff, some Symantec stuff, some Microsoft stuff, and then Oracle. Oh. And so it's got a pretty just in that one tool alone, it's got quite a bit of functionality. And for privilege escalations, you might be able to, off any of those, be able to grab an account that's got what the stuff that you need to go one step further. I mean, you just kind of think about it. What you could do with some of those protocols that I mentioned, you could easily capture credentials and see, okay, what could these get me, or what damage could I do with these?
Yeah, so we've gained access to the system by cracking, brute forcing, or guessing one username and password. Now that we're on the system, we can sniff traffic and try to capture others. Maybe they've got more credentials or more privileges than we do. Maybe they don't. But at least we've got more options that we can now try, rather than trying to brute force or guess other usernames and passwords. Just capture what's going on the network there and try those and see. So that's one way you could escalate your credentials. Another way, Sean, might be to actually modify the account that we hijacked, or not hijacked, I shouldn't say that, but the one that we've attacked and broken.
Yeah, you could do that. You go in there and start tweaking stuff in the SAM to see if that helps you out. And by doing that, then you can log in. Or I mean, one of the ways we saw of doing that in our previous CEH was to use the TRK, the Trinity Rescue Kit. That's exactly what it's doing. It's modified an existing account so you can get into it, and then you can start doing whatever you need to with it. So you have that possibility as well. And we're not even bringing into the picture stuff like scripts that you could possibly build. We're not bringing in keyloggers where you could drop one of those on the system, because those would help as well to capture this information and just go one step further with it. So you've got quite a bit of approaches that you can take to escalate privileges. And remember, there are two types of doing privilege escalation. There is the horizontal one, where you are just going from one account to another account with increasing privileges back and forth until you acquire the level you need. Or you do a vertical, which is where you have an account and you try to get more privileges added to that account to raise it up. So you could approach it either way, depending on what is going to be the best approach for that given situation. Right. So there's different options that way too. But these are just some of the things. I mean, with DSNF, if you capture credentials, off something, that would definitely be a horizontal privilege escalation, because what you're doing is you see another account with more privileges and you see its password. Well, okay, I'll just jump over and use that one, and then I'll potentially run other sniffers or do something else at that point to get more information. Just keep jumping back and forth till I have what I need to start to plant something on the system or run something on the system.
Nice. So we got to get those, it depends, right? I mean, you might have broken in and actually got the administrator account. That user account that you picked up might be in the local admins group already. So maybe you don't need to do the privilege escalation. Maybe you can go right into starting to run some of your programs. But if you find that you can't run those programs that you're trying to do once you've gained access, then we go to that privilege escalation. And if we've done our SAM file dump, if you can see, I know there's some tools that we can use to dump RIDs and things like that. Remember how that works, like in a Windows system, 500 is the RID for that administrator, that built-in admin account. That's the one we're looking for.
Yep.
Hopefully.
Yeah, it's definitely important to remember that little item as well. So we've targeted accounts, figured out that we can do a privilege escalation. We just got to figure out how far we're going to take it. Don't think your ultimate goal is always going to be the big bad administrator account. You may not need that to accomplish what you need to accomplish. So if you don't need that, don't go after it, because that's a more heavily defended account, and it's more closely monitored typically. So avoid being too kind of touchy-feely with that account, because you could get detected and then game over.
Yeah, that's a good point. That user, even though they're not an admin, might have access to the database. Maybe they're the database administrator, or maybe they're just an elevated user and they got all the access you need to get into that database server, or whatever the case may be. So you're not always looking for that administrative account, just an account that has the privileges that you need to carry off your penetration test or your attack.
Exactly.
Nice. All right, so let's say we've done it. We've got a password. Either that user account had all the privileges we needed to do our penetration test, or we were able to escalate our credentials using something like dsniff to maybe do that horizontal escalation, or we're able to modify that user and do a vertical where we've added privileges to it. What comes next? Now we can run what we want to run.
Yeah, that's where you start making the choice that, yeah, you're going to start running some things that are of use to you. And what could be of use to you? Well, you name it. You could have all sorts of things. You could run either stuff that's already on that system, or stuff that you have brought from someplace else that you are now going to execute there. Because you could have very easily compromised an account and then brought a program down to it, and now once you've got it in there, now you got to execute it, do something else with that user's context. So that would be our next step. Let's start executing applications, and these applications could be used to later on leave a back door open, something that we could use to come back in later on to maintain access. So you might be thinking long term, you're not just running a tool to do one thing, you're leaving a tool to allow you to open it up later on and go in and do something else. So you keep coming back and dipping in just in case you missed something. So that's something you can add to the mix. You don't need to run an application that just does one thing. You can leave something there, plant something there that lets you leave a back door for later use. So we fortunately have something that can handle that for us, and it's a nice one.
What's that?
Tell us about it. It's Netcat. Netcat. It's old school. It's been around for. It's kind of amazing. I think it's been around for almost 20 years now.
Wow.
I was just looking at the page for them, like, wow, that's been around that long. So it shows you just how how well it works, and that it's very useful if it's stuck around like that. So what we have here, this is my Metasploitable machine. What we're seeing here is we see NC at the front of it. That is the shorthand for Netcat, so you do not have to type out Netcat. And what I have there is I have the -L, so the -L says to listen, and that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is telling it listen on that port. Okay. Now the -E means execute, and we have in quotes after it have TCP dump. So what's going to happen is I hit enter on that, and it's running, it's listening. Okay. Now since it's running and listening, it's waiting for a connection to be made. So where's that connection going to come from? Well, if I go over to my Kaylee system, you can see I have NC and have the IP address, and then have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what's going to happen is that's going to go out to that IP address and connect to that port. So okay, we've gotten that far. So what's the significance of it of running this command and attaching to that other system? Well, if we go back to the other system and take a second look or closer look at this, you can see that at the end, that -E, and then it's got those things in quotes. What that means is that when a connection's made to that port, it's going to run that whatever's after that E switch. So I just stuck TCP dump in there to have something in there. But let's just say for a moment that this was a Windows system. If this was a Windows system, I could do something like this, cmd.exe. What's going to happen if I do this is when that connection comes in from the other system, it's going to come in and hit that port, and when it hits that port, it's going to fire up cmd.exe.
So it's waiting for, so you're telling it, hey, listen on this port, and as soon as somebody connects, execute this, and you should be able to get that from that other machine.
Exactly, that's what that's going to do. And by the way, you can do it you can flip-flop these a bit. You can have it so if you attach from a client system to a server system, it will actually push a shell and open up a shell on your system. So you could by doing some subtle manipulation of these, which you can figure out just by looking at the commands for Netcat, you could tweak that to get all sorts of different results. So think about that. You could get this on someone's system, And then all you have to do once you get it on someone's system, just run a simple command line like this, or have it scripted so it starts up every time they start their computer. And now once that's done, all you have to do is punch in the IP address, and it will fire up that command shell, and then you can start doing whatever it is you need to do.
Right, so you can get that command prompt with that system level access at that point, you're good to go.
Yeah, exactly, and it works quite well. That's why it's been around for so long. It really does a good job, at what it does. So that's Netcat. That would be very effective at running stuff remotely. You also have its companion called CryptCat, which it's going to mean scrambling the stuff in transit, which Netcat doesn't. Something I will warn you about with Netcat, if you're going to play around with it, or if that's your intention to, be aware of the fact that Netcat is very frequently flagged as malware, so if you try to get in your system, it'll get kicked right back off.
It's one of those things that's been around for so long, all the antivirus softwares have definitions for it, and it's going to be tagged really quickly. So yeah, just to play with it, use your antivirus software. Don't turn your antivirus software off, but make yourself a folder, put these kind of tools in there, then get them from a good known source. And I have a folder on my machine that my antivirus knows not to scan. Anything I dump in there, it leaves alone. Otherwise, yeah, as soon as you download it, it'll be gone. You're like, where'd it go? Have to go download it again, and it's gone. So
Yep.
yeah. And that happened a few times. Loftcrack was another one that just gets tagged immediately, and finished downloading it, and Defender wants to take it away. So set yourself up a little test machine, that you're not worried about too much. Run antivirus. I think running it's still a good idea, but exclude one of those folders, and that's where you can keep all those special tools.
Yeah, that's the problem with this field, getting all these little tools. Yeah, they're gonna get destroyed and beaten up by whatever antivirus you have in the system at that point in time. It's just the way it works.
Right. All right. So we can run Netcat, and we can do just about anything, Sean. I mean, is there any limitations really to what we're putting behind that E? Just whatever we want to connect to.
In theory, there's some limitations, but they're to be minor.
Obviously, it's got to be installed on that system, whatever it is you're trying to run.
Yeah, I definitely keep that in mind. Unless you're lucky enough to be able to bundle up a bunch of stuff and deploy it to a system, then try to keep it so it's nice and simple and it's restricted to stuff that's already there. If this was a Windows box, I already know the cmd.exe is there, so I don't have to bring anything. I just got to pass that command and make sure Netcat's there, and it's going to happen. Right. So that's kind of what you got to keep in mind when you're doing this. Netcat doesn't only do this sort of thing. Netcat can also do banner grabs. It has the ability to do that, plus a whole host of other stuff too, if you really need to do that. So you might want to take a look at Netcat at some point, or CryptCat, and see if there's any other things you want to know about it. Even if you're not going to use it on your network, I'd say take a look at it, because it is still used, and it could be something that you're going to defend against later on.
And at this point, Sean, we might actually cycle back through our phases. I mean, I'm picturing myself doing a pen test, and I'm on the outside, and I've done my footprinting, as we'll call it, or information gathering, and my scanning and my enumeration, and then I've done my exploitation. I've gained access. Now I'm inside the system. Might I just turn around and start over, and using those same tools from the inside, start doing some more information gathering, because it might be different from what I was able to get from the outside, and scanning and things like that?
You might. I would seriously consider it, because you might be able to get a little more access once you're on the inside and know what the lay of the land looks like. You could start saying, okay, well, here I found some other applications and other things in this environment that I could use to start kicking things up. One of the things we didn't even get into too much here, it was mentioned, was once you get on the system, you might be able to start going out and targeting your Cisco boxes and stuff like that, stuff that you couldn't necessarily see all of them from the outside. So now you're on the inside, you can start targeting those and see if you can get any information out of those that might help you. See if you can escalate privileges on those. There's ways to do that. So you've got more possibilities, yeah. So you might be circling around to see if there's another round of things you can do that will get you even more stuff.
Nice. All right, so last thing I think we want to talk about is that maintaining access. I want to make sure that once I've gone through all this trouble to get into this system, I want to be able to get back in at any time. So maybe I am coming back and doing some more scanning, and I want to wait until after hours where nobody's using that machine or something, or I just think it's a little bit safer, or what have you, or whatever. So what do we use to maintain that access? Any specific programs or techniques we use, or?
Personally, I would think if you can even get this Netcat running with the -L and tell it to listen on a certain port and run an executable, that might be enough to leave a significant backdoor open for you to attach whenever you want. Now you just got to make sure that you're in a position where that port is going to be available. It's not screened or anything like that. Then you can go ahead and attach to it whenever you want. But there are other ways to maintain access. You get a password, you change it to something that you want, and you take over an account, or you create yourself an account. That could be a way of maintaining access. So you do have a lot of cards that you can possibly play to keep to keep regular access to that system.
So if I can get Netcat to launch automatically, somehow add it to their startup, or a little script in their startup or something like that, that's my back door then. Anytime I want to connect to that port number, I know it's there listening.
Exactly.
Fantastic. I like it. All right. Well, shoot, Sean, we've gone through the whole list of our exploitation process there. We started by gaining access to that system. We talked about what we meant by gaining access. We talked about cracking passwords in both the offline and the online format. We talked about escalating our privileges. Might have to, might not. Really depends on what account we got in the first place when we were doing our gaining access. And then we talked about executing programs remotely. Netcat being an extremely popular one because it does so much. It's so powerful. It's so lightweight too. Sean, I can't remember how big it is. It's like kilobytes or something. It's a pretty darn small, if I remember right, Netcat. So it's a very tiny little payload. It might be a few megs, but
it's insubstantial.
Yeah.
The download I got is 105 kilobytes.
Yeah.
So it's
teeny tiny, not going to take up a lot of space, not going to take up a lot of bandwidth sending it over there. It's just a little blip on the radar, really like that. And then that can become our backdoor, our way of maintaining access, because once I get it up and running, it's just sitting there listening on that port. I told it what port number to listen on so I can connect to it anytime. I do want to try to make sure that it's running automatically. Like if they reboot their machine, they've got Windows updates to do or what have you. I'd like a way to make sure that runs automatically. Otherwise, I've got to somehow gain access to the system again. Hopefully that person hasn't changed their password and launch it all over again. And then there's other tools. You, like you said, might be able to make an account that nobody knows about, or reset a password, or enable an account that they thought was disabled. So many different ways we can maintain that access or set up that backdoor. Remember, backdoor just means I want to bypass their normal authentication method if I can. So lots of good stuff there. All right, well, Sean, anything else we want to throw in on exploitation before we call this one a wrap?
No, I mean, that was a pretty good look at the overall process. So you got exposure to the different tools and different steps that are involved in that, and now it's just a case of taking it further to see maybe what other tools we can use, because that's really what we're going to talk about after this is specific tool types that would come in handy when you are doing your penetration testing process, things that you could use, a lot of them in that last phase.
Nice. Looking forward to that. I hope you guys are too. All right, well then, Sean, in that case, we'll call it a wrap on this one. We hope everybody enjoyed watching this episode. I know we had a great time filming it. For now, signing off for IT Pro TV, I'm Mike Roderick.
And I'm Sean Ariano.
And we'll see you next time.